Hello everybody, my name is Hannah Collison from Inspired Creations Surrey School of Sugarcraft, and today I'm going to show you how to make a wired poppy in sugar. Here is a picture of the project that you're going to be making. And this is a list of the materials that you would need to organise and prepare if you'd like to work alongside. Of course, we can email this to you as well. Feel free to get in touch. Okay, so this is the poppy that I've made, and it's got 5 petals. It's quite big. It's quite big. But if you've got a smaller petal, that's absolutely fine. Just bear that in mind when you're making the stamens. Okay. Now I'm going to show you the center for the flower itself first, which is made out of pale green petal paste, and it's also it's been attached to 24 gauge wires. So I'm going to take just 3 half cut 24 gauge wires. If you've got 26 gauge wires, or if you've only got 3rd cut wires, that's absolutely fine. You can use those. Let's just position this a bit more centrally so you can see me. Okay, so I'm just going to take some of my Nile green tape. Again, if you're brand new to making wired sugar flowers, in a minute, tell me, and then I can kind of talk you through the basics of this. But if you remember, what we do is we stretch the tape. I don't have a very long strip. Stretch the tape, position the 3 wires so they're kind of all in a rounded position rather than side by side, and then place that onto your tape. Press the flap over so it sticks to the tape again, and your tape wants to be at a nice acute angle, a couple of twists, and then we push that up to the top. So just pinch hard and push the tape up to the top. The acute angle means that you're going to end up getting a nice neat taping where you're not actually taping over the wire too many times. Okay, so we're going to go all the way down to the bottom. Doesn't matter if you've got an inch or so that's exposed. You can also, if you can leave it like that, or you can take a little bit of extra tape and just tape down. Now what we need is 1 stem like this with a hook in. So I'm just going to bend the hook in by hand. It's not closed up. It's easier with the 24 gauge to bend by hand. If you're using 26 gauge wires, they're slightly thinner, so you may be able to use your angled tweezers to bend the hook. Now, if you can make me 2 stems, and the reason for that is that later on, I want to show you how to make the seed pod as well, because I think this is absolutely beautiful. So we've got our work cut out today, making all of this in 2 hours, but I think this is well worth showing you. So if you make me 2 stems, each stem has got 3 half cut 24 gauge wires taped down in Nile green tape. So to make the center here, I'm going to use just over 1 centimetre of green paste. To get it nice and crack free, just give it a bit of a twist and a bit of squeeze in your hands, and then roll really tightly between the palms of your hands. Okay. Now, if you use your finger to just pinch a little point on one side. Okay, so we want to try and create a teardrop shape. The domed part is going to be the top. The pointy part is the end that you're going to push your wire in. Now, ordinarily, what we would do is put sugar glue on here, push that in to about 3/4 of the way, and then leave it for a few hours to dry before we try and put all the stamens around. But because the weather is quite damp and we're trying to get this done in a short amount of time, the quickest way to actually set that piece of paste onto the wire would be to burn it in. So that's where the tea light comes in. So I've just lit my tea light. Just, you know, health and safety wise, just take a bit of care over this. Don't set fire to your hair or the kitchen. I don't accept any liabilities for fires in people's houses. So a little bit of a flame on the wire, just so it's nice and hot. And as you feel like it's warm enough, you can go ahead and push that. You can blow it out first if you want to. Push that into the pointy end of the cone to about 3/4 of the way up. Now, this is going to be a little bit warm still, so just be careful. But the fact that we've burnt that in will mean that the paste has melted, but almost immediately set. So this is anchored quite firmly on there, whereas with the sugar glue, that would be fairly loose still. Okay. If you're not happy with the fact that you've got this brown showing, then you can actually tape over it, although that burnt part will be hidden underneath all the stamens. So I'm just going to show you how to prepare the top here now. So once you've burnt your cone onto this wire, I'm going to go ahead and just flatten the top just a little bit. So between my finger and thumb, I'm just very, very lightly pressing, like a bit of a pinching action to flatten this. Try not to invert the top. We just want a flattish surface. Okay. Now, once you've done that, if you have a pair of tweezers, it doesn't matter if they're angled, but if you have a pair of tweezers, just use one end to put a very small little dot in the middle so that you know where the center of your piece is. And then using your tweezers, having closed them just a little bit, probably to about 2-3 mil, place those onto the shape with the tip of the tweezers towards the dot and just press down and pinch so you create a little groove. Okay, now if you haven't got tweezers, you can use your fingers, but it's not as easy. What you could do is use the side of your Dresden veining tool and kind of push on one side and use your finger to scooch up against that to create this ridge. But ideally, I mean, you could try a pair of scissors as well, but ideally tweezers are best. Okay, so we're going to go all the way around now. I'm going to fit 6 in there, but it doesn't matter how many. You just want this strange looking. And this is actually the seed pod. So it's in the center of the flower and it develops into this once the petals have dropped off. And you can see that this top bit grows. Okay, so that is the center of your poppy. Okay, so you've got, yes, you've got the cotton version here and you've got the actual stamen version. Now with this, if your cutter is very small, then you're going to want small set of stamens. Okay, so I would say as a bit of a guide, you don't want to, if your depth of your cutter here, so the height of the cutter, you don't want your stamens to be more than halfway up that cutter. Okay, so I would say to about there is okay. So it's just a bit of a judgment that you'll need to make. So let me show you. First of all, we're going to do the seed head stamen one. And I've got, what have you got? There's about 12 seed heads there. Okay. And if I fold them in half, I get 24. And I have 28 gauge wire this time, which is a finer wire. You can use 33 if you have it. So 28 gauge wire. Take your 12 headed stamens, bend them so that you form a loop. The idea is to have these roughly at the same level, and then push your wire through the loop and fold it over about halfway, a bit like a hair grip. And then we're going to twist tightly. Okay, so do that 4 or 5 times just so you can see that the stamens are not going to fall off. To secure those to the wire, we need a little bit of tape. So I'm using my Nile green tape, scooping all the stamens back. And my taping needs to start above where the wire is hooked. Okay, so this is where you can control the height, the length of the stamens. If you know that you want them a little bit shorter, you can tape from higher up. So here mine are about the right length for my flower, so I'm just going to start just above where the hooked wire is. Okay, so you must make sure that you catch above where the wire fold is, and then tape down a little way. You don't have to tape all the way, and we're just going to tear that off. Pinch quite firmly. Put your thumb where the tape started, push back against it, so you fold, and then curl forward again. So you've got this shape, okay? And while you're there and holding on to it, you can just flare them out sideways, okay? So you've got a set of stamens, and you need to make 5 of those, okay? Now, what I'll do is show you the cotton version as well. So if you're using cotton, this is how you do it. You need to make sure that you part your fingers, because you don't want to get blue fingers while you're doing this, but also depending on what length you need the stamen, if you want them longer, you might want to put 3 fingers together. So I'm just going to part my fingers to about there, hold on to the cotton and wrap round about 20 times. I've got my cotton in a pot so it doesn't fly away, and when I'm happy and I've got the thickness of cotton around my fingers, I can just simply snip off. So I take that off my fingers. So I've got a big loop. If you take hold of the other end and twist it in the middle, so you get a figure of 8. Okay. And then you fold one twisted loop over the other, so you get a nice collection of thick, shorter stamens. Same now as working with the proper stamens, the shop bought ones. Thread all your 28 or your 33 gauge wire through, loop over like a hair grip, and then twist tight like a sandwich tag. 4 or 5 times at least, so you can be sure that that's going to hold. Put your scissors into the loop, just a tug. So I haven't opened the blade, I'm just pushing that through, just to kind of use the nose of the scissors to pull up so that all those loops are roughly the same length. Scooch the stamens out of the way, and then go ahead and position your tape. Now this is a repeat, it's the same as if you're doing the one with the shop bought stamens, okay? So we have to go above the fold in the wire. If you don't, then when you cut, they will pull out. Tape down a little way. Okay, so now you've got this. And finally, use a pair of scissors. We're just going to hold on here so it doesn't all fly off the wire. But if I bring the blade of the scissors through, pull up and cut through all my loops, and then use the blade of my scissors just to check that I have in fact cut through all the loops. And if we just bring this all up to the top here, I'm going to put my nail right at the top and use the scissors again just to trim the scraggly pieces. Okay. Then your finger goes right at the base of where we've taped, push back. It's the same as for the other stamens. And then if you can, curl forward. It's a little bit harder because of course the cotton hasn't got any structure to it at all, so it's very difficult to curl it, but you will end up with stamens. Okay. All right, so you need to do 5 bundles, either in cotton or using the seed head stamens. Okay, so the poppy petals, I'm using, I've used red extra for this because it's definitely stronger than the poppy red, although you can dust afterwards, so it doesn't really matter. So I've just got my red extra in there, give myself a nice warmed up crack-free piece of paste, and then I'm going to roll it into a sausage. Now as a ball, this is about 2 centimeters diameter. Don't use your entire paste to roll out one petal, because we want this to be rolled very thinly and we don't want the rest of the paste to actually dry out on you. So 2 centimeter ball of paste should be enough for one petal. Roll it into a sausage, roughly 4 centimeters in length, and put that sideways over your groove. The reason for this is because you've got quite a wide cutter. Before you're trying to roll it long, you need to make sure you've got the width. So using my rolling pin across the paste, I'm just going to roll sideways So I have almost pretty much got the width. It will grow a little bit more. And then I'm ready to press down quite firmly and roll up the groove and roll down. And you need to really roll the paste as thin as you can. And today you might find it a little bit soggy, especially if it's absolutely pouring down where you are. So when you roll it thin, you should be able to see the center groove showing through. Okay, just going to roll that just a little bit more just to get it nice and thin. And then I'm peeling off. And I'm going to use a little bit of corn flour because that feels a bit sticky. I peel it off to reveal the ridge. Don't cut it on the ridge because it will stick. And it's very difficult to line up your cutter if you can't see the ridge clearly. So the bottom is the bit, for me, where the solder is. It's where it's kind of coming to a bit of a point. That's going to be on the fattest part of your ridge. Press down nice and firmly and then pull the extra paste from around and just rub the outside edge. Okay. Then the excess I'm just going to pop into a bag. Take yourself one of the 28 gauge wires. I'm going to place the ridge along my finger. I'm left-handed, so I'm feeding the wire in with my left hand. Push the wire through the center of the ridge and apply a little bit of pinching pressure between your finger and the thumb that's holding the petal as you start to push the wire through. If your wire is crooked, you might find it will come out. So if you find that it actually comes out or you feel like it's coming out, just stop, pull the wire back a little bit, apply a bit of pinching pressure between your finger and thumb, and then re-push it through. My wire has gone up to here, so I'm about 3 millimeters away from the edge of the paste. Okay. Now, once you've done that, we've got a couple of processes we need to go through, so I'll show you these as well. The ridge is going to go face down on the bottom of this veiner. The way to identify if you've got this the right way up is you've got PP for poppy, or it might have LPP, which is large poppy. If you can read that as PP rather than DD upside down L, then you've got your veiner the right way to know that you can put the ridge face down on the bottom. Okay, so we're just going to flip that over. It's because that will make the back petals. The indentations here are more indented than here, and the reverse of that is raised impressions, and that is what's on the back of the poppy. Okay, so once that's in, if you feel like it's going to stick, put a little bit of corn flour on your veiner, close up your veiner, press nice and firm, release the pressure to reveal all the texture. Okay, now I've got corn flour on that, but when we colour with the petal dust, then that's going to go. So as it's come out of the veiner, this is the top. We're going to transfer it onto the foam pad. Stay away from the holes in your foam pad if you can avoid them. And then use either your fat end of your ball tool or your bone modelling tool, so the big end, and trace around the outside edge, half on and half off the foam pad. So we're coming across here, all the way around the top. If you notice, I'm not holding onto the wire at all. I'm letting it flow freely. If you hold onto the wire, it restricts the movement, but it might mean it will distort. So now we've got a nice little ruffled edge. And you have the choice here. You can replace it back onto your hard surface, and you can do a bit more work on the top here, which gives it this much more kind of wispy texture that you get to a poppy, like it's blowing in the wind. And you've got either a cocktail stick that you can use for this, or if you've got this smile tool from Gem, it's got a silk veining tool texture on one side, and that texture will transfer onto your poppy, so it gives it more interest. And all I'm going to do is just press that down onto the surface, just like so, only that far on, and then just between my finger and thumb, apply a bit of pressure to the tool and roll at the same time so that you start to thin this top edge. Now just work to halfway. Bear in mind that you've got a wire that's probably going to be into about there. Just be careful in this area that you don't actually cut through to the wire. If you prefer, or you haven't got that tool, then you can use a cocktail stick, and that will give you texture as well. So you can just place that on the paste with the fattest part here where it starts to taper on the edge of the petal, and then just roll backwards and forwards. I haven't done the sides. I'm only going across the top. So the final bit then is to shape this. So I've got my finger going on the top here, my thumb at the back, and I'm just going to use both fingers and thumbs, both finger and thumb, to curve the petal. Now, when you do this, just stay well clear of where the wire was fed up to, because if you press and try and bend there, it might come out. So we've got a nice curve. Finally, flare out just by using your fingers to open up the texturing that you have created on the top. And that gives it a lovely kind of wavy look. Now, it's flopping back a little bit here. I have to be careful. I want to keep this area flat so it will go around the center. Here's my center. Okay, so I don't want to close this up so much that I can't fit it around my center. But at the same time, I don't want this dead flat and open, because otherwise it's going to just simply not fit. I'm not going to be able to put any other petals. So we want this kind of spoon-like cupped shape. Now, in this weather today, even though I'm using squares, this is not going to hold if I just set it upright. So I have to drop it so it's upside down, and then I'm going to make 2 bends in the wire, 1, 2, and that way I can put it on the edge of my oasis. Just push that in, and it will sit and hang quite freely. Okay, so the second bend is to move it away from the edge of the oasis, and that petal then can just sit there ready to be assembled once it's semi-dry. Okay, so I'm going to show as well how to do this by creating just a ridge by hand. So this is if you have not got a ridge board. Feel free to carry on if you are happy with what you're doing. So same amount of paste, 2 centimeter diameter, into a sausage, but this time not so fat. Okay, so something like a party sausage is quite good. Take your rolling pin and position it on top of the sausage, press down nice and firm, and begin to roll out sideways. Then what you're going to do is position the rolling pin across the top of the ridge again and roll, by having pressed down, and roll out the other way. So you can see you're starting to create a ridge. I'm using 28 gauge wire. I think someone's just asked, Ruth, 28 gauge wires. Okay, so you just keep rolling either side. Now with this, because it's quite a big cutter, it's maybe just going to fit, but I want to make sure it definitely fits. So I'm just going to roll it this way as well, just avoiding the ridge for a moment. Okay. And when I first started learning how to make flowers myself, the ridge boards weren't around, and they described this as roller sleeping policeman. And it took me, you'll notice as well that I'm using a slightly smaller tool to get a bit more control over the thickness of this. Now I'm coming into the ridge and rolling out. So I have only got a ridge in the center. Yeah, so, and I was thinking, what's a sleeping policeman? I don't know what a sleeping policeman is. Roller sleeping policeman. Well, they meant a ridge to insert the wire. And then someone explained to me that the sleeping policemen are the humps in the road that you get to slow the traffic down. Didn't know that. Okay, so now we've got this lovely ridge. We can go ahead and create the petal in the same way. So this is a redem for everyone. This is the same process now. Okay, so if you want to see how the petal's made again, then just have a little watch. Okay, the one thing I find about this is sometimes your paste isn't as thin when you roll it out. So just try and be a bit fussy about that. So place the ridge over your finger, insert the wire in the center of the ridge and pinch between your finger and thumb that's holding the paste. The pinching process forces the wire to stay in the middle, and it also allows you to feel if it's going to come out. So my wire has gone into about 3 millimeters from the end. And once you've inserted your 28 gauge wire, you're ready to put it into your poppy veiner. Now I can see the ridge clearly on here. The PP is reading so I can see it as the letter P. So the bottom is the back. The ridge is the back. The ridge goes face down on the bottom veiner. Press down, try not to wiggle too hard. You want to give it decent pressure to make the paste nice and textured and thin, but you don't want to distort the wire. Release the shape from the mold carefully. Remember to put corn flour if you think it's going to stick. And then we drop that onto our foam pad, ready to thin with the bone modeling tool. Thin both sides and across the top, half on, half off. You can press quite firmly. Bring it onto your board and either with a cocktail stick or a silk veining tool, just roll the edges so you make it much thinner. It gives this little blousy look. And if you haven't got the tool, the silk veining tool, then you can go ahead and use a cocktail stick quite easily. Okay, just take care not to rip through. All right, between my finger and thumb, I've got to bend. So this is the bending. That finger on the top, thumb at the back, supporting the wire, and just curve against your finger. Flare out the frilling that you've just done. So you're kind of stretching the petal edge. And then if you think about a spoon, you could, I guess, actually put these on spoons. Don't pinch this bit closed too much. You want it a little bit cupped. So you've got this shape going on, poppy petal. Okay, and upside down it goes. One bend, a second bend, so that when you put it into the oasis, you're away from the side of your block of oasis. So I'll show you again while you're doing yours. Okay, so moss green and lemon yellow mixed together, dust the outside of your center that you've made. And then colour on the top as well. Okay, once you've done that, you can go ahead and put your black markings onto the top of the center. So this is white alcohol mixed with black petal dust. Twist the bristles of your brush within the paint to make it come to a nice point. And then instead of running vertically, run it sideways across the ridge or along the ridge. Just one brush each time, avoiding going back over the same area again, because it might lift the colour off. If you have to repaint, then do that once it's dry. Okay, because if I'm really tempted now to actually overpaint this because it hasn't come strong enough, but there's a possibility that it'll lift the colour. Okay, so now we've got our centre of our poppy coloured and ready to receive the stamens or button. Okay, so now I've got to put my 5 stamens around. So it doesn't matter if they're cotton or otherwise, it's the same process. It's got a little bit of stretched Nile green tape ready to go. And one by one, we're going to put these on. Now, bear in mind that this is still quite soft. Normally, you would let this dry overnight before you go ahead and put something like this around it. Because as I'm putting these on, it's going to attack this bottom part of the cone each time, and it can weaken it and then make a bit of a mess. So the best suggestion I've got for you is, as you're positioning these, only tape down here, don't tape right up the top until the last minute. So if you notice, we've got a bend in the stamen here. So that would be the same for cotton. So this part of the tape where it starts taping is in line with the bottom of the cone, okay? It's not down here and it's not up. It's literally the tape lines up with the bottom of the cone. That's really important. And with your tape, just put a twist, just one twist around each time you add a stamen. So my tape is down here and I won't come up here until I've got all 5 positioned around. So we'll go ahead and take the next one. Put that one beside. If you go around in an order, it just makes it a bit easier. So again, the tape lines up with the bottom of the cone. It doesn't go above the cone. I never tape up onto sugar either. So again, next one. Next one. So it is going to look a bit gappy until we adjust it. So the next one's in, tape in line with the bottom of the cone, twist down here. And then the last one, if we just make a little space, because ideally we want all of these positioned beside each other, and another twist of tape so that we know that they're all roughly on. I'm going to come up to here with my fingers and thumbs and just give it a little squidge without pressing too hard, and that should hopefully stick each bundle of tape together. And then we can look up the top and just get them sort of in position. We don't have to worry overly about this because we can adjust it once it's all fully taped, but just try and even them out. Now, because I'm there, I want to now tape all the way up to the top here. Now you could break off and you could start at the top and tape your way all the way down, or I'm going to do it. So I'm just stretching the tape and positioning it as I'm taping up the stem. And I'm going to tape up the stem and over all the tape that was is holding the stamens together as well. Okay, so it all looks quite seamless. You're not going to see any of this because your poppy petals are going to be here. Okay, so once you've taped all the way around, you can come back down again a little way. You don't have to go down too low because you've got poppy petals coming in here as well. So all these loose petals will wires will disappear, and you're also going to be putting a pipe cleaner on here. So when I look at this from the top now, I can just help it a little bit by spreading those stamens around. And in the wind, I'm sure these can be a bit ruffly. It doesn't have to have a perfect view. All right, so if you want to do that for me. So using the red petal dust, I'm just going to colour the whole of the petal. Now, because this is just enhancing the colour and it's not really giving definition, you can load it up quite heavily. And if you're worried about loose petal dust coming off onto your cake, then once you've assembled your flower, you can go ahead and steam it under the kettle or over the kettle, and that will certainly set the majority of the colour, but just check. The other thing you can do, if you can get hold of a little puffer like a camera lens puffer, then that will puff air over your petals and take off any excess before you put it on the cake. Okay, so that's also taken all the cornflour off. Now, to give it some depth, I've got my black and I'm just mixing that with a little bit of my red to make a ruby shade. If you've got ruby, or if you have aubergine, that would be quite nice. And here I'm catching the base of the petal and I'm just drawing a little bit up to the center to give it a bit of depth and definition. A lot of this is hidden behind the stamens when it goes on, when they go on. Okay. Now, I want to show you how to put the petals together on the flower and also show you the seed head. So we are a bit limited to how much time you can spend on your colouring, but I will give you a moment, a little while to have a go. But what you might find is that you'll be able to assemble your flower and actually colour it once it's assembled. So here, if I wanted to do that, then I would just pull my petal out of the way once it's dry and go ahead and put my colour on. So there is an option if you decide you want to assemble partway through your colouring of doing that once it's all put together. So I've got my centre with my stamens, and now we're ready to assemble. But the best tip I can give you is if you bend your petals out of the way before you start to put together, it'll make your job much more easy. So take hold of the wire right up where you started pushing, where the paste starts. Clamp on with the tweezers, but push back with your fingers. Okay, what that does is give you a really, really tight bend here. If you bend with the tweezers rather than your finger, the bend is away from the paste and it doesn't make for a neat assembly. So clamp tight to the paste, push back with your finger. If you do that with all of these petals. Okay, and then we can go ahead and put together. Now the idea here is that there is going to be some overlap with the petals because they're quite big. When you look at some of the poppies, they have just 4 petals and they have 2 on the inside and then so opposite like so, and then you have 2 behind that come in on the opposite side like a cross. But with these, because they're so big and blousy, they're going to require a bit of overlapping. So I'm just taping in the stem one by one like we did with the stamen. Don't worry if they start to move around, just let them do so. And then you can put one in almost opposite. Now, if you find that your petals are too soft to do this, then don't do it. Let them dry, don't force it, and finish your poppy later. Okay, so you've got one opposite. I've only taped down here. Take another one. Come in here. Now this one's probably going to have to overlap. So again, the wire is where the tape starts up here. So that's where you put where the paste. So petal base goes to where the tape is in there. Twist. And again. So a bit of overlap again. And once you've got 4 petals in, I know they're flying around a little bit, but if you just have a look from the front and just maybe make a little room for the last one to go in. And then this can come in behind, okay? So there's no real rule to this, especially bearing in mind that poppy petals are so thin. They blow around in the wind and you can't really tell where they're supposed to settle. They just kind of settle where they settle. So now we've got all of those petals positioned around the stamen center. I'm going to do the same as before, stretch the tape and use my finger to help guide that to tape up the stem. Just take care not to mess about too much with these petals because again they are still quite soft. It's always a good idea to make things like this and let them dry. The one advantage to assembling wet is the fact that you can adjust the shape of petals if they're not fitting too perfectly, and that then makes for a very natural flower, but it is a little bit on the challenging side to assemble whilst it's wet. So now I've got all my petals in there. I might just want to adjust this one, but I'm not going to fiddle too much because I'm just going to show you how to thicken your stem using a pipe cleaner. And poppy stems are quite thick. So I've just got a pipe cleaner here. It doesn't matter what colour, it's not going to show. And you've got a decent thickness here until about this point. So where it starts to thin, that's where I'm going to position my pipe cleaner. Over tape it. See, there's a bit of wire showing here, which I don't want. So I'm just going to over tape and continue taping down, but this time over the pipe cleaner. But relax the pressure or the tension in the tape just a little bit so that as you tape down, the thickness of the pipe cleaner is showing, okay? And that should mean that you get a nice, even thickness stem all the way down. We'll just keep going until you get to the bottom. Last bit here. If your pipe cleaner is longer than the stem, trim the pipe cleaner so it is the same length as the stem. And when you've got to the point where you're ready to trim, you can use a pair of wire cutters or scissors to just take off the excess at the bottom. Now, the taping you could do with smoothing the stem down a little bit. So I'm just using something shiny and plastic and smooth just to rub along the stem. If we do that all the way down, then that overlapping of tape will hide a little bit. It just makes for a neater finish. And you can see I've picked up a little bit of red from my fingers dusting the flower, and that's nice. It just adds to the detail. So looking back at the flower now, I've got one petal here that's just hiding a little bit, but I quite like the idea of having a petal that's tilting down, and you've got the ones in the middle. So it's sort of worked out that these three are in front and these two are behind. And that's your poppy. So the poppy seed head is made from some pale green, gooseberry green coloured paste. Now I've got red on my fingers, so that's going to incorporate into this, but it'll only add to the interest. And you want a ball that is 2 centimetres diameter or 3/4 of an inch, or let's do a weight for you. Hang on a minute, got to zeroise. Whoops. 6.2 grams. There we go. If you want an accurate weight measurement, 6.2 grams. So give it a good warm up. So we don't want any cracks in here. Give it a twist, squeeze, roll tightly between your hands and release the pressure to get your crack-free ball. And then you're going to make it into an egg shape. So just slightly cone shaped. I don't want it to be too pointed at the narrow end. Okay, so we've got like an egg shape. You know those, what are they, chocolate, the Cadbury's chocolate eggs. Do you remember right at the beginning you made two stems, didn't you? So I'm using one of those stems that we made. Just going to fire up my candle. And we're going to burn the hook again, and this time it's going into the fat end, so the fat end of your egg shape. So set fire to the cone, no, to the hook, push that in. You can blow it out before you push it in, it's not a problem. I just like the whole sizzling sound as it goes through. So that's gone into about 3/4 of the way. Now on the top here, I want to make just one little mark as a hole for the center. And then I'm going to come out by about 1/2 centimetre and start to pinch out a circle ridge, like a dam, if you like. It's just a raised part, pinched all the way around. Okay, now you can do it by your fingers as well. So if that's easier, just use your finger and thumb to pinch out. Okay, so you've got a raised part. It looks a bit like a queen's crown. Now this is the genius bit, because using a cocktail stick, or if you've got it, this tool here, I'll just locate my cocktail stick. I'm sure I'll find that in a moment. I know it's here somewhere, but we'll use this one for a second. Face the sharp edge of the Dresden veining tool down. Press it in just inside the ridge you've created. Push and tease up towards the center, but don't rip through. And what you're doing is creating an indent that then lifts up to form a hole, and you're raising the paste in the center. Okay, I'll just locate my cocktail stick so I can show you how, if you haven't got that tool. So if you've got a cocktail stick, the same process, push in, pull up. Okay. And this is where, when you turn these seed heads upside down, that's where the seeds come out. But you've got this raised bit in the middle. Trying to see whether, sorry, I've got a poster in the way there. Okay. Now to finish off the detail on this, what I'm going to do is take the fat end of the Dresden veining tool, but if you haven't got one, you can use the cocktail stick again. We want to just press in some markings on the top. So I'm pressing at an angle, just press and kind of draw down, but not so indented. We don't want, it's just a subtle impression that we're after. A bit like if you blew a sweetie bag up and then scrunched the neck of the bag slightly, you get this crease effect. And we're going to do the same at the bottom as well. So just using the side of the tool so it's not sharp, just to get some markings in there. So if I can get that a little bit closer, you might be able to see. Yeah, you see it? Okay. So that then is left aside to dry. But what I want to do is just show you how to get this little disc on top. And that is using this cutter shape, okay, which as an alternative, you can use the 6-petal cutter from Orchard Products. So this one, all I do is take a little bit of my green paste, roll nice and thin, just a bit of green paste, nice and thin. And then we take our cutter, cut the shape out, give it a little rub so that it comes out clean, and then just use one of your tools, whatever you can, to poke out. Oops. Okay, so my shape's come out. So wet today. Just need to separate these petals like so. Okay, so now I've got my little petal shape. I'm going to put a bit of corn flour on that because it is definitely soaking wet. Take your tweezers and each sepal, having lined it up with the center, so you can put a little dot in the middle if you want to, position the tweezers over each sepal, press down and pinch to close up. Now, if you remember, when you made the center for the poppy, you pinched the ridges into the cone. This is a larger version. It's a fully grown, finished, petals have dropped off version. So this is the seed pod that's left after the flower has been spent. If I try and lift that up so you can see the ridges in there. Okay. And this is exactly how they look. They're amazing. That ideally you would leave to dry for a little bit so that when you do attach it to the top with a little bit of glue, so just in that raised center that you've made, put your disc or flower on top. And that's the bit that flicks off, and then in the wind, all the seeds come out of the seed head. Okay. Now to color this, all I've done, just bring my tray of colors back in, is I've got some eucalyptus and a bit of green and a bit of white. But if you mix cornflower blue with white and a touch of green, you get eucalyptus as well. So you don't have to go and buy eucalyptus. You can make it yourself. So a little bit of cornflower blue, a little bit of white, a little bit of green will give you eucalyptus color. Okay, this is my eucalyptus there. So a little bit of eucalyptus in places, a little bit of true blue, the full green in places. I've already caught a little bit of the red on there because that was on my fingers. Some white. Mine this white here happens to be pearlized white, so it's got a sheen to it as well. And incidentally, when you spray or put pearlized colours on the red poppies, because it's a dark colour, it comes out almost silver, and it really, really makes it ping, even though it's not 100% bona fide real flower style. Okay, so we just having put very pale colouring on there, and then very carefully, ideally when this is dry, you can do the same on the top. Sometimes these are brown. When they're completely spent, they're brown. So you could, if you were doing a Christmassy spray, autumnal or Christmas spray, you could just colour this more dark brown colours, more oaky. Okay, so it's very, very pale. And then I've added in a pipe cleaner in the same way. And that gives you your poppy seed heads. And 2 of those together would look absolutely stunning. Just bring my poppy flower back in. Just finishes it off.